Let me introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Dave Martin. As EMC's Vice President, Chief Security Officer, Dave is responsible for managing EMC's industry-leading global security organization focused on protecting the company's multi-billion-dollar assets and revenue. Dave has both functional and operational responsibility for all of EMC's information, risk, crisis management, investigative, fraud, and workforce security operations, tasked with establishing EMC's brand of trust with its customers and providing business protection operations worldwide. The GSO's mission is to ensure that EMC can continue to develop, build, and deliver the world's most trusted and leading information infrastructure technologies and service securely around the globe. Dave was appointed as EMC's CISO in early 2010. Previously, Dave led EMC's Office of Information Security, responsible for protecting the global digital enterprise. He was responsible for delivering EMC's technical business operations protection program that provides a services portfolio encompassing global security operations, enterprise security architecture, investigative support technologies, consumer and cloud security, and EMC's Critical Incident Response Center. Dave joined EMC in 2004. Prior to joining EMC, Dave built and led security consulting organizations focused on critical infrastructure, technology, banking and healthcare verticals, where he focused on developing and delivering enterprise security programs, incident response, investigations, policy, and assessment practices. Dave frequently provides testimony to the U.S. Congress and government agencies as an expert witness on corporate enterprise protection issues. Dave brings a range of experience in information security and management to EMC that he developed over a decade of professional business protection experience from various roles in internal audit, security services development, and consulting. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Manufacturing System Engineering from the University of Hertfordshire in the UK and is a certified information systems security professional. Excuse me. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dave Martin.
Thank you. Thank you. So a mental note to make sure they use my short form bio whenever they send it out. But thank you. What I wanted to give a little time to do today is about 18 months, 2 years ago, EMC was breached, RSA, no secret. But I wanted to share some of the things that we learned out of that. Going into that breach, we weren't asleep. We had great technologies. We had great people. We were well funded. So what was the gap? And what I want to take you through today is kind of what do you have to do to be prepared? Who is it that might be interested in your information? And kind of how can you look at protecting that rather than trying to protect your entire department and kind of look at a different way of approaching your mission? So first up, and you've probably seen a similar slide from other presenters, either later today or previously, it's kind of who are the people that are trying to get to our information? And it really, if you look at the different classes, the good news is you don't need a different technology set necessarily. You don't need a different process set. You have to be paying attention and you have to have taken the step to think about who is trying to get my data? What do I have that they really want? In my case, it's intellectual property for the most part, or information that I have that might give access to our customers. But for you folks, you obviously handle a lot more personal and private information. You do have information that can be leveraged to attack other people. So you have to just really think about what is it within your department that any of these cast of characters would have that would be interesting to them. And sometimes it's not obvious. And I think the best example I've heard in the last 2 or 3 months is there was an advanced threat actor attacked a plumbing supplier. Like a plumbing supplier? What do they want, the customer list? Turns out plumbing suppliers know lots about copper. Turns out that copper is a really important material to know how to work and to acquire and even change the price of. So sometimes you can sit there thinking that why would they want little old me? Why would they want something that I have? And sometimes it's obvious in the case of some of the organized crime. Clearly, they want to be able to monetize things, and there's lots of things that we all have to do that. But you really just need to think about these different types of groups. One surprising one for us in the last 6 months was anonymous. I mean, they were on our radar. We don't really consider ourselves a huge denial of service risk, but we had in the support of the CISPA bill. So a simple letter, something we're passionate about to support information sharing, critical infrastructure protection. The fact that we're on that, the next thing you see ourselves featured in a YouTube video and on a list of people that are now a denial of service target. So you really need to kind of pay attention to the news, pay attention to what you're doing, pay attention to what your function is doing out in the world, because this threat profile will change. So know the main cast of characters who want something that you have, but then also just pay attention to how that may be dynamically shifting. So advanced threats in general, and notice I've dropped the persistent because I really want to address a lot of the skilled people that are going to get things that you have, whether it be organized crime, whether it be a nation state, or some factions of kind of some of the terrorist groups are getting pretty skilled or are acquiring or buying skills as well. So these kind of folks, they're not the opportunistic hacker that we used to deal with 5, 10 years ago. These people are absolutely determined. They don't want a DVD player. They don't want a flat screen TV. They want yours. And they will go to great lengths. So it's not enough to have the best sneakers and be able to outrun everyone. It's not good enough to have an alarm system because they'll go to the house 2 doors down the street. They will spend a lot of time. They have pretty unlimited resources and financing and funding to be able to collect information to do something that will get into your network or onto one of your employees' machines or even one of your customers' machines and try and get in. They're more likely to target individuals over systems. Yeah, the perimeter's still there. We can't ignore it. There's all those applications, whether they be in the cloud or in our own data centers, the perimeter's still there, and people will still try and poke at that. But there are much more easy attacks. And God love people, but we will all click on a link someday. I will click on a phishing link at some point. I know it. They're too good. I just came back from England for my mom's 70th birthday, all the grandkids, relatives. I can see a message from my mom. And even when I look at the headers, it is really from my mom's mailbox. It's that targeted. I will click on that link at some point. I'll be rushed. I'll be not paying attention. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do training. We'll talk more about end-user awareness and Cybersecurity Awareness Month later. But you can reduce that attack surface, but it's not enough to say, yeah, I can train people not to click on links. People want to click. People will click. So we have to rely on other layers that make it more difficult, create speed bumps for them that maybe suggest this is not something that, even though they clicked on it, that they really want to go to that page. And we'll talk about some of those technologies. The more that we do build out and protect our networks and our information, these guys don't give up. The kind of attacks that are getting used against the defense industrial base and the government today are the attacks that they're using against me 6 months later. So when we talk about the importance of information sharing, it's really important to understand they do reuse tools from the toolbox. They do reuse attack methodologies. So it's those things that we need to learn, and that's why information sharing is so important between the public and the private sector. Now, we can't throw away those IDSs, IPSs, AV. It's largely a commodity, but it still helps reduce the noise floor to be able to find these more sophisticated attacks. In the case of the RSA breach, not one AV signature fired, not one IDS signature fired at all, until we actually started writing very custom and targeted rules, but there's nothing out there. But that's not to say that these technologies don't have lots of things that kind of take the mundane threat out of the way so we can spend more of our time and resources on the advanced. And that was one change that we made about 2 years ago within my incident response team was conventional malware. Unless we saw it spreading, unless we saw it consuming bandwidth, unless we saw it going out and kind of pulling down new versions of the malware with increased capability, we let it be. We let the AV signatures deal with it the day after that. It wasn't threatening our mission. It wasn't going to hurt our bottom line. We would watch it, but it was more important for us to go watch the more detailed and targeted things. They want to get into your network and they want to stay there. They want to set up shop. They want to be able to get, in my case, kind of updates to software and patches as it comes out. They'll read the documentation. They'll know the schedule of release, and they'll be back the day it comes to be able to pick up the fresh. But they also want to be able to get persistent access to get new versions of information. continuous streams of personal information, credit card numbers. And sometimes that doesn't actually mean that they stay resident. They don't leave malware on systems that wakes up every week, every month, every quarter. They might. But it's really, really easy to come back to that phishing, social engineering, get people to visit a web page, and that takes them off to get malware. It's easy to do that. So often they won't even remain resident in your network. They'll just come back on the known schedule that they need to be there. So pretty depressing, but how do we defend against this? So it's increasing in volume and sophistication. And there's this picture of the cyber kill chain all across the bottom, which if you do a search on the internet, Lockheed Martin have some phenomenal papers out, which really drives a lot of the way that we track and understand not only the metrics of how well we're defending, but also just see very detailed metrics about where we're managing to defend. And we base that on the kill chain. So that's certainly an easy search to go, and there's tons of useful information out there. They really are the thought leaders in this space. So we find that a lot of what we do today is defending against the delivery and exploit phases of an attack. And that's where we really are triggering from our monitoring centers, an occasional lucky signature hit. If you are doing kind of advanced analytics and you are getting information feeds that you're able to custom tune your sensors, still that's largely where you're hitting. When somebody has when malware's getting downloaded, ideally you want to be as far into the green as you can. The problem is that's exponentially hard and often exponentially expensive, and we don't all have endless resources to be able to do that. But ideally you want to be able to see, and occasionally we get lucky in our program, where you see somebody downloading from a known IP address one of our own product PDFs from our internet website, and then they'll weaponize it, inject malware, and then bring that back in as a phishing attack. Occasionally we get really lucky for one of those attacks, but most of the time we're really still able to defend against the delivery and exploitation. What you don't want to be is where we were a little over 18 months ago, is when people are already starting to take things out. It's really expensive, it's really painful for your customers, and it also means that there really is a loss involved. In that case, we were like kind of single-digit days after the start of the attack. Our program now tries to target a 24-hour time frame for discovering that somebody's got into the network. So I'm not trying to base my defense on keeping people out. I want to minimize the amount of time that the attacker has in my network to set up shop, to figure out where they are, get their tools ready, and start kind of exploiting against targets. That's an uncomfortable place to be, but as we start to kind of measure the success of the program, we can reliably see now, and sure, there may be something that we haven't seen that's been there 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. But from the attacks that we do detect and we know, we're hitting that SLA today. Clearly, there are, I think the percentages from the Verizon Business Security Report, a little over 90% of people find out when the FBI or some other agency show up knocking on their door and say, hey, I found this on the internet, I think it's yours. That's definitely where you don't want to be, because I've talked to some of those customers, and that is kind of, the attacker's been in there a year, 2 years. Even with the best forensics, you will never really know what they took. You'll know what was handed back to you, what was found on the internet, but you won't be able to say, this is exactly what they took. How do we know who to notify in that breach? We don't. We just basically have to assume a total loss. So it's really important when you design your programs and you think about metrics that you're measuring the amount of time it takes you to detect that something's happened, not how few that you can actually detect before they get in. So, and this kind of slide reinforces that, and we'll talk more about actually identifying critical assets and basing the defensive program around those in trying to protect everything. And increasingly, I mean, we heard a lot about social media and mobility. All of those tools make prevention a fail strategy. There are so many ways for data to get out of my network that I can't block or instrument. I mean, yeah, I can block certain types of websites. I can encrypt HTTPS websites, SSL, to the internet, to be able to monitor those. But at the end of the day, there will always be, users and data will always find a way to get from A to B. So it's important that we balance a certain level of controls, because you can't give up totally on the control space either, but you have to understand that it's not going to be a total strategy. Spend lots of time on education and not telling people they can't. Try and then tell them why. Try and relate it back to what they do every day. Try and relate it back to, all those people that come and get driving licenses. How would you feel if you had to face every one of those and explain to them why you chose to put some of their information on Dropbox? I try and do it internally so it's great that you like to use Evernote on your iPad to kind of take notes in those customer meetings, but how are you going to explain, A, to our CEO that you just lost X million dollars worth of business, and B, how are you going to feel when you have to go and face the CIO or the CEO of that very large multinational corporation and tell him how you thought your convenience was more important than protecting his information? So relate it back to kind of what they do every day and some of the company values. Has been really important, because I can't stop them from doing it. But we won't give up on detective controls either. So a lot of times I'll actually try and drive consumer web traffic onto my network and not block it, because I'd rather see it happening than drive people to go do it on a tethered mobile phone or a 4G access point, or kind of walk 2 blocks and go to Starbucks. About 2 years ago, I started to notice whenever I went to offices, like a lot of people wouldn't be in the office anymore, and I started asking, well, where did everyone go? Pay all this money for real estate and lights and internet. Oh, they don't like the controls, so most of them work out of Starbucks now. That's great for Starbucks, but not very good for me. So a lot of times now in the program, as I say, we're looking at how do I keep traffic on my network? How do I get traffic from a mobile device to come through my filters, even if I don't actually filter anything? I just want to see the logs and traffic. I want to know that somebody clicked. I want to know if they clicked from their personal email because they were targeted there via Facebook, or they were targeted via LinkedIn. I want to see that that traffic happened, because then I can respond. I can respond very quickly and very actively. But being able to do that requires a few things. One is you have to be well instrumented. You may detect something that you need to go back in time to network traffic that's still there from 2 weeks ago, from 30 days ago. During the breach, we were able to reconstruct, once we got the encryption keys out of the malware, we were able to reconstruct what they did. I had a command-by-command, play-by-play. So when I got questions about, well, how do you know that they didn't take a left turn and go into EMC and touch any of EMC's products? Well, because I pretty much have a command-by-command, play-by-play for everything that happened. And the speed of being able to generate that from network traffic was in hours and days, rather than doing host forensics, where I would have had a very spotty picture of what happened, and that we would probably still doing host analysis today. Host analysis is very slow and very expensive, and you don't get much information. You've still got to do it, but it's not as useful as being able to kind of replay the attack. So you have to be able to go back. During the breach, though, why is it only 60, 70%? Because I didn't have enough storage, ironically. I pay list for storage, unlike hopefully you guys. So I didn't have enough storage, so I only had kind of network traffic back for like 12, 14 days. By the entry into this year, I was at 30 days. By the time I leave this year, we'll be at 60 days retention of full network packets at the edge. And that's still, I want to drive more of that traffic that's off my network from mobile devices, from people on VPN. So I'm getting to see the most complete picture of what people do. And there's a privacy balance. My employees are not exactly comfortable about that. They kind of, like you used to hear about the NSA, and perhaps still do, they're like, oh my God, you guys are reading everything. I have 120 people. There are 50,000 employees. I know how much network traffic that is. Really, we are not reading everything. I'm looking for malware, and I'm looking for intellectual property. Those are the two things. We will not read anything else because we don't have the time. So it's not just about technology. I didn't implement too many technologies after the breach. Most of it was taking what I had and looking at things differently. Sure, there was a short-term technical remediation, clean the streets in the IT departments. Kind of like, yeah, I've always asked you to patch vulnerabilities. Now I'm done, and you have to do it. The absolute basics, hygiene. Create a culture of security, that end-user awareness, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's not just for October because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's not a one-time-a-year thing that we have to check the box for compliance. Enterprise risk and governance. So I'll talk more about that model because that's been key in actually creating a change in that culture. We've already talked a little bit more about focused detection and response. How do I know something has happened, and then what do I do with it afterwards? And then obviously, we've evolved our program in a step. is now just every year, every quarter, looking at our strategy. Is this still defending against the people on that first slide for what I believe that they're interested in? So this slide will be available afterwards. I don't want to drain it, but it's useful so people ask for it afterwards. So here's some of the very tactical actions that we did. Some not so tactical, deploying network access control. I'm in just about every country in the world, and we have over 500 sites, so that's taking a while. But we're getting that level of visibility. Other things were a lot more immediate in nature. I'll talk about one. So internet access. So as soon as we discovered what was happening, we had to have very direct control of being able to get the attackers out the network. So I shut down basically the entire internet, other than absolute critical customer sites and other support sites that we needed. And then gradually started to reintroduce things back as I was able to manage the risk. So one of the examples there is for the uncategorized sites in the web filtering software. Initially, I thought that I could just categorize the internet. It would be painful for the first month. We'd get 2,000 requests a week. I'd submit it all. I'd map out the internet. Life would be good. I'd be able to keep truly uncategorized sites blocked. Didn't happen. 2 months later, I'm still dealing with 2,000 exception requests a week, and it was clear that this was a failed strategy. But at the same time, every domain name that was used during the breach was in that category. So much malware had been prevented because it couldn't phone home to get updates or say that it was installed, that I didn't want to kind of walk away from this, but I didn't want to waste kind of 5, 6, 10 people's time processing these exception requests. So we found some middle ground, and this is an example of something you have to do all the time, and that is now you have to kind of click a splash page that says, hey, this is going to a riskier area of the internet that's somewhat uncharted, be warned. That page now is starting to have statistics about how successful the page is, because I have a lot of engineers in my company who are like, this is stupid, the attacker's going to click on the button. Well, no, because the attacker can't get into the network to get behind the mouse to be able to click on the button. So yeah, let me give you some statistics about why this is a smart block. And then once they get past that page, there's no object upload or download. So that's not a perfect solution, but it stops for the most part certainly any updated malware download, and certainly any attempt to just kind of easily transfer information out. So there's a few pieces there. That's really effective. If I look at our phishing statistics, so about 2 years ago, we did a survey of phishing, and people were about 20% of people would click on a reasonably crafted, no, reasonably crafted is a little unfair. One of those UPS-like email, click here, a package is there for you. So really not that good, but about 20%. So if I got 1,000 in, there was 200 people that were clicking. After the training, now we're down to about 2%. So 2% of people still want the click. Okay. But now they hit the uncategorized link. Of those 2%, so in that case, it was 17 people on the test that we did. 17 people still clicked. Uncategorized page, they click through that. So now I'm down to 2 people who are so determined to get infected that they wanted to go that far. But you can see how the attack surface is already small. When they got there, they were not able to get infected because there's no object upload or download. So you can see how the layers work together, and even if one of them fails, one of the other layers is likely to minimize the threat. Some key things around Active Directory. So our attackers didn't go after Active Directory, but it was a trigger point as we looked and we replayed the attack and said, okay, so if they didn't do it that time, what are they going to do next? And for a while after the breach, I was actually doing kind of replays in these kind of forums of the attack itself. This is what they did next. This is what they did next. We wanted to stop that as soon as possible. A, it's a little personally painful, but more importantly, I don't want people to defend against my attack. You're going to be defending against your attack. So it's more important to think about what your attack's likely to look like. Who is it? What kind of tools are they likely to use? What kind of defenses do you have in your network? And how will you fare? How will you fare if somebody comes to you and says, we found this file, it looks like it's 30 days old on the internet? How are you going to do forensics? How are you prepared? What are you going to do next? So it's more important for me not to talk about this specific attack. I'm happy to, it's fine. Lots of therapy. But it's more important for me to get people to think about controls, and that simple tabletop of driving home today if this happened to me, somebody showed up in my office and said, hey, we found these 10,000 social security numbers. How are you going to know how that happened? Because until you know how it happened and how somebody got in your network, you can't lift a finger to defend. And I've seen companies that are in a similar situation to us at that uneasy point in realizing they've probably got 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks worth of controls built out to be able to get visibility, to be able to understand how somebody's in their network. That's a very, very uncomfortable place to be in. In our breach, once we found somebody within the network, we couldn't react immediately. We had to put together a takedown plan. And there's nothing like going to your board and your executive team and saying, so there's some people in our house. They're kind of in the dining room right now going through the silverware. And they're like, great, we'll go shoot them, get them out of there, call the police. We go, well, we can't. We're going to have to sit and let them continue going through the silverware while we figure out the best way to get them out. Because I don't want to get the guys that I can see in the dining room and leave the other people in the bedroom. You have to fully understand how they are in your environment so that you can act very violently, very quickly, and get them back out. And then know that you've shored up the defenses that they immediately don't get back in. So just think about some of the things on your commute back home. How would you fare in your environment? What could you do differently? And as I say, well, we'll make this slide, and I'll be available afterwards if people have got specific questions, because there's a lot of content there. So, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, October, it's great. I'm an NCSA board member, support it. It's a phenomenal activity. I have my team and even extended EMC and RSA people around the world, not just in the US, going out, doing outreach into schools, teaching people, teaching the next generation who are probably the CISOs in their own households, the same way that my kids used to come home 5 years ago and say like, hey, why are you throwing that bottle in the trash? It needs to go in the recycling. That's the kind of mentality we need to get into kids that will start to change, and then when they get in the workplace, they're going to be much better than where we see people today. But in general, like, end user awareness is really valuable. You have to explain people, as I said before, in terms of what the real risk is, what the threat is, relate it to what they do and what information that they have. It's not just kind of saber-rattling, scaremongering, you can't, you must do this. You have to treat people like adults. You have to give people reasons to care. And you can't just do it one time a year. So increasingly, we're moving our kind of programs that we had for compliance, where they'd get 45 minutes of training, they'd get 5 minutes of me droning on that they'd kind of mute and go back to their conference call, and changing it into dynamic questions, trying to get people at point of risk. So like using that splash page on the way to the risky part of the internet. I want to interrupt somebody as they walk out of their cubicle door with the scissors in their hand about to run down the corridor, give them statistics about kind of how many people get hurt running with scissors, kind of give them some sensible options of rubber tips for the scissors, plastic scissors that they might want to do, or maybe just walk, and then like now try and get them onto the right path. Put some rails in place that will have them do the right thing. And I don't want to do it one time a year. I want to be there every time they're about to do something risky. I also want to try and identify risky people. So part of our incident response program is to look at and kind of like, okay, so you clicked on our phishing test twice, you've clicked on 2 real phishing tests. Maybe I shouldn't give you access to Facebook and webmail. Maybe I'm going to kind of penalize you for a little while and start to get to a point of dynamic security, which is going to involve a lot more conversations with our user base, because if I'm going to shift the goalposts on them, they're going to have to understand well why they are where they are, and how do they go to driver's ed to get back to somewhere where they can kind of do all the things that they want to do, while still not interrupting what they need to do for business. Because at the end of the day, that's the quickest thing that will get an escalation to me, which wastes my time and my team's time, is I've got to find safe ways for people to do what they absolutely have to do, and then maybe make the variable part of security the frills, the extras that I give them. So lots of different components, so posters, videos. We use games to try and get people to understand and educated, and more we're trying to use real statistics. We're trying to tell more and more people at different layers of the company about real things that happen, and particularly real things where somebody decided that a control wasn't important and wanted to take a shortcut. So all of this doesn't work without evolving the risk and compliance at EMC. So 2 years ago, risk and compliance, well, I mean, I still had 100 people. We had an active risk team. We'd do assessments. We'd work with internal audit. And there was an executive security council. I would go periodically to the audit committee at the board and kind of tell them about how we were doing. They were really just interested in, so everything's okay, right? Because we want to sleep and we don't want you to sleep. Okay, this is not that good. Also, policies were written by my team, signed off by that executive team, and then kind of handed out. And I say the term handed out, they were parked on a web page and gathered dust. So let me think. Policies that are written by me that I'm asking people to be accountable to that really don't get educated on that well, wouldn't it be better to actually sit down with the business, write policy with them that they believe that they can live with, have that written by people closer to the trenches that are actually really going to have to live with it, not people like me who go, oh yeah, that sounds fine, not realizing that it breaks lots of different processes, makes people's lives miserable and difficult, and makes them seek other easier ways. So we kind of go through this cycle. We had the technologies, but let's go back to basics. Let's rewrite the policies. Let's get cross-functional teams from lots of different departments to sit down and write policy that we can live with. And start with one overarching policy, but then also tighten it down as we went down into different areas of the organization that needed to be more restrictive based on the data that they had, the geographies that they're in, the type of access that they have. And then make sure that the controls I have are effective in those areas, not just peanut butter spread across the infrastructure. Make sure that we can focus more on detection and measure and bring that back. And then when we have policy violation, go, why is that happening? Because we have the wrong policy? Because we have controls that are failing and I need to go back to my vendor or I need to go back to my team and say, hey, why are we not able to detect this sooner? And kind of complete the cycle. But the key difference is we have business engagement. And now that given business engagement looks like this, instead of just me and that bar across the top, we've got GRC councils in every different business unit that work and resolve risk locally. When they can't resolve it, it comes back up to a cross-functional team. And at the first of these meetings when it really got off the ground and started working, I'm sat there and I'm like, there's 20 people from different business units talking about risk and coming to decisions. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm going to get out of a job here. And I started to realize, no, this is actually good. Peer discussion, and sometimes it's true peer accountability. You wouldn't let me do this last quarter. Why am I going to let you do it today with the same data type? You won't spend $10 to do that? That's actually great, because before, even those trivial things would either not even get surfaced, or it would be me having to present them to an executive team. They don't need to be involved in that stuff. So now we see a lot more risk getting resolved way lower in the organization. We're also starting to understand more about the true other risks that the business have that are far outside of information and data that we can actually balance. And more importantly, we're actually starting to see the opportunity. If I allow them to do this and find a way, what's on the other end? I mean, that for us is going to be revenue. So I'm like, okay, is me saying no to something that's a medium-sized risk preventing them from entering a market that could be worth $1 billion? Okay, I probably want to find a way to resolve this risk. So a huge dialogue, and we're starting to get to a point in this program where the business is hiring security people into the business. And that's uncomfortable as well. You go, oh no, they should report to me. I got security in my title. But it's not. I want more and more people aware about risk and security in the business that will spread the message and surface risks when they see them. And yeah, we'll be a consulting team. We'll be here to help. We'll track that central risk register and a set of tools to be able to mitigate risk. So it's a change that I've seen over the last 3 years in the level of integration. And most importantly, there are more people doing security at EMC, even if my team's about the same. And that's huge. So the last and probably the biggest component of evolution that we've managed to do in the last year, 2 years, what's allowed us really to survive while we've built out of these other things? I've talked about NAC taking 2 years to implement. It's a solid incident response and monitoring team. And before the breach, we had 24/7. There was 14 people in this team. They had the same technologies they do today, bar 1 or 2. What's the difference? Information is the difference, and a change in focus. So if I look at kind of this 5-year evolution of where we've come with the cert and the last phases we're right in the middle of, initially when I went to EMC 9 years ago, we owned a SIM. It wasn't implemented, so let's just take the one off the shelf. Let's start putting all the events, firewall events, AV events in place. Great. and let's have people to monitor it, which initially we thought, well, we'll have a security operations center. That's what everyone calls them. Turns out the security operations centers for us turned into people that would help people with VPN problems and getting blocked by firewalls and kind of the enabling side of security. They never had the spare time that we thought they would to actually monitor these systems, really. So changing that around, we built an incident response team that's entirely separate to the SOC that still exists today, that all they do is monitor and respond. And we went through just basic detection and signatures and basic correlations, starting in advanced reporting to take in information feeds, whether it be sharing information from classified sources, from commercial information feeds. And this is something I get asked a lot. You know, this is great, so after the breach you got invited into and you get classified information. I can't get that. How am I going to survive? It's okay. I can tell you that in the commercial feeds, just about all the information you need to protect yourself is there. It doesn't come with the same level of attribution. And that's okay. Obviously, there's a lot of legislation that I don't think is going to happen, certainly before the presidency, the election. But there's still hope there. We'll continue to support it. Information sharing is critically important for us to be able to defend ourselves. So we'll keep up the fight there. But you can use commercial feeds as long as you have people thinking about what they mean to your environment and not just trying to apply that entire fire hose to make them targeted. And then more and more, these attackers are getting the identities of our employees. So a lot of our control base today and our access control is based, hey, if you got a username and a password and you got the right role, have at whatever system that was or whatever network that is. So we're increasingly trying to look at kind of true behavioral analytics. We're starting to do things, what we call ground speed. So if I VPN from Sacramento today and then I'm leaving here to go get on a plane right to Boston, there's a set amount of time before I should be seen VPNing now from an IP on the East Coast back into the office. But if during that time period I've kind of suddenly invented a time machine and I'm able to get from A to B, we'll raise an alert and we'll start to kind of poke into, is it just a GeoIP anomaly? When we're expanding that to our web access, our mobile phone access. So we're not tracking people, but we're trying to understand kind of, if I'm here today and the next minute I'm connecting from St. Petersburg, Russia, an hour later, we either need to get me because we need to kind of patent that technology and start selling it, or I'm probably not me, I'm me and an unfortunate friend. So lots of focus on advanced analytics. Another area we're doing is IT administrators are always in the thick of every incident. So we're spending a lot of time trying to focus on how do you do behavioral analytics on a group that everything they do every day is an anomaly. If I was to go to one of our IT admins and say, okay, so you're going to have to list out all the commands you're going to do today on every system, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. So we're looking at work permit approach. The first thing we did is on all data center access for DBAs, for sysadmins, for the security team is now done through a secure jump host environment. So you have to go to a virtual desktop session that doesn't have internet access, is kind of hardened and patched every day and reviewed by the security team, single-use instance. So you go there with a two-factor, and then for the systems beyond, say for Active Directory, you need a certificate as well. So in that case, there's multiple layers of two-factor access to get there. Other systems that don't support it, you at least have to come through that clean jump host environment. But then we're also asking our administrators to fill out work permits. So yeah, you can't tell me every command, but I can take a look at the tickets that are assigned to you and then expect activity against those, so I can kind of weed those out of my correlations. And then I can also say, where are you going to work today? If you're going to work on a new SAP BI instance, then I expect activity there. If I see activity from you in our data center in Ireland, then I probably want to give you a call and ask you some questions about what you're doing, if it wasn't in some of the other tickets that you had. So it's not a perfect system. There's still lots of false positives. But these folks are always right in the middle. If I can see that it's outside of their normal working hours, if I can see that this isn't something that they plan to do today, there might be a legitimate reason, but it's probably worth that call or that interaction with them just to make sure that that really was them that is doing the work. And those are the kind of analytics we're starting to look at, is how do I actually spot that you're not doing what you have done for every day for the last 3 years that you worked there? And we'll start with the IT admins because we're right in the thick of it, but we want to be able to move that out to employees as well. Kind of look at, we have the travel database. So can I actually see that I'm connecting from a place, even if my ground speed looks legitimate, that I don't have any kind of travel tickets or airfare to? We have central travel booking. So it's really thinking outside of our normal event and information base. So how can I use other information that I have to spot people doing unusual things that they've never done before? So the other piece on the incident response team that makes a difference, before, the only piece of this team that I really had, and some of the other functions were converged, was the box on the right, the critical incident response team. People who would watch the network 24/7, 365, really useful function, and they would do a little bit of malware reversing. They would kind of look and do some open source intel. They would kind of think about what the cert was going to look like in 12 months' time. But it's only when we split the teams up and gave people focused roles to actually take information that comes in from the outside, commercial feeds, understand how it applies to us, run some searches back. Has this ever happened in the log base that we have, which is over 100 days? Have we ever seen this? In some cases, it goes back a year. Have we seen anyone ever click on and go to this website? So do some triage and then start reconfiguring systems so if somebody does it in the future, that we will immediately get an alert and also prioritize that alert. These indicator feeds are really useful, but they need to be managed. I can't just keep adding new indicators every day, because at some point the systems, as good as they are, will grind to a halt. So we have to manage different types of indicators, and we kind of classify them at the highest level in, if this is an actor that or a campaign that we've seen, it basically will stay there forever. If this is one that we think is interested in our company or our vertical from the intel that we have, it will stay there for a year. If it's one that's in passing, we don't think is anything that we've seen, then we'll hold it in there for 6 months. And we'll try and continue to kind of wash through the indicator base because we can't just keep adding more and more into the database. We spend a lot of time kind of thinking about high-value targets, not just assets and systems and networks, but also people. And it is the executive team for sure. And I have kind of the physical protection of those folks and thinking about what they do when they go to somewhere like Russia or Israel and China from a technology perspective. But it's also, there are plenty of other smart people in the organization that have huge amounts of information about either our customers, our employees, that might be exploited. We also do some work with social media. We have kind of fake social media profiles out there that if people kind of friend those and start targeting those, there's no good reason. They have no friends. They're not real people. So we try to run some operations that are just trying to weed out some interesting things. We've had one on the RSA side where we had a repeated attempt from a nameless country with people saying, hey, I found this token, and I really want to know whose it is. Okay, well, I can't tell you whose it is, even if I wanted to, because we don't know the person it's attached to. But again, it was just somebody looking for information to be able to go conduct an attack elsewhere. So it's not always technology. It's not always somebody to exploit that latest 0-day or get somebody to click on a link. Sometimes it's very subtle nuances that are especially more and more starting to come from social media. We see a lot of activity on LinkedIn, a lot of kind of fake people trying to connect in to various people and very targeted people. And then we've also seen some of that then used in a phishing scheme against us. So breaking up this team and then continuing to kind of farm indicators. We get those new indicators in. If we do find a hit, we'll do the analysis on the system. If we find 4 more IP addresses, domains, or additional malware, then we'll not only tune our systems, but we'll also share that back out through the sharing focuses that we have to be able to get that information back out in the community. It's the only way we're going to survive. And there's a lot of talk about information sharing that says, well, great, if we're going to share information, then the bad guys are going to know what we know, and then they're going to change. I'm okay with that to a point. We should try and prevent that whenever we can. But we understand we need to get to a point where we can share at least low-level indicators without attribution in a machine-readable, real-time fashion. So building off the ISACs model, whatever we need to do, we need to find a way of getting information out that kind of like AV signatures today. My mom doesn't need to understand that this is some kind of terrorist in Russia. She just needs to know that it's bad. yeah, there are advanced teams that can use that and with attribution build off it to create more information for the community, and we should manage that as well. But for the most part, we need to kind of, some ways, return back to the signature base. Yeah, signatures aren't effective, but you know what? Very dynamic signatures that just says, hey, for the next 48 hours, this is bad, don't let anyone go there, can be functional. So sharing also just brings up, now the attacker has to go waste time and stop attacking me or anyone else to go create a new domain or a new set of malware. So we're also kind of wasting their resources as well, but we'll only be effective if we get very, very good at sharing information, and we're still a long way off from that today. So the final piece is, so how do I bring this all together and have continuing dialogues with the business that's not, wow, the sky could fall, the sky could fall. And I take the traditional audit and paper responses, vulnerability assessments, bring that all together into one platform, and then also tie in the incident response data. So for every incident that fires, every correlation that fires, I fire the equivalent of a traffic light camera. Who's the person behind it? Where is that server? What business unit is it in? What data center is it in? Is that user in their normal office? Are they traveling? All this information at one shot automatically. So now I can tie it back into my reporting, and I can actually start to look at, hey, not only might this happen, it did 5 times in the last month. And by analyzing the data, sometimes I can even tell why, and actually, instead of, well, what do you want to do about it? I don't know, more security? I can actually say, no, we need to translate our end user awareness into Japanese, or I need to kind of expand my product base because it doesn't support double byte, so those guys keep turning it off, or whatever the scenario may be. So I can actually start to evolve this and have real conversations about real incidents that are tied to people, business, products, customers that I couldn't have before. There is one more slide. I talked a little about this before, is to get from not only just doing detections, but actually start looking at where you are, what you have, where you're going, what that really is in importance, and factor in, like, how much of an easy target have you been for our phishing scams? How well do you score on our end user awareness? Are you click happy? Factor those in to make a decision of whether I'm going to give you full access, partial access, require some more authentication, require you to go to a virtual desktop system because that's going to push more controls in front of you. I don't want you to go from that uncontrolled iPad, to decide whether you can actually get and transact with the data that you want. Okay. So I really hope that is useful. I will be around. The slides will be available because I know there's that one really in-depth slide that has kind of all the activities. I'll make sure that my email address is on there, so if you have questions and you don't find me today, that you know where to reach out. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. It's really important stuff.